You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.
My New Year's resolution is to move forward on our unfinished business as much as I can. And I'll be more frequently asking for your help. That's what this American project is all about.
But you don't have that much time to take away Americans' guns, declare martial law, and put hardworking Americans in FEMA camps. If you're going to do that, you better get started. You better get
this notion of a conspiracy out there, and it gets wrapped up in concerns about the federal government. Now, there's a long history of that. That's in our DNA. You know, the United States was born suspicious of some distant authority.
But let me just jump in. Is it fair to call it a conspiracy? I mean,
well, yeah.
There's a lot of people really believe this deeply, that they just don't. No. They just don't trust you.
I'm sorry, Cooper. Yes, it is fair to call it a conspiracy. What are you saying? Are you suggesting that the notion that we are creating a plot to take everybody's guns away so that we can impose martial law?
We can impose martial law.
But there's certainly a lot of people.
Conspiracy? Yes, that is a conspiracy. I would hope that you would agree with that. Is that controversial? Except on some websites around the country?
There are certainly a lot of people who just have a fundamental distrust that you do not want to go further and further and further down this road.
Look, I mean, I'm only going to be here for another year. I don't know. When would I have started on this enterprise?
And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time.
There's a lot of people out there who don't trust you, obviously, on the issue of guns. You keep saying you don't want to take away everybody's guns. There's a lot of people out there tonight watching who don't believe you. There's a lot of people in this room who, frankly, don't believe you. And it's not just that you don't really have personal experience having owned a gun, but it's that things you've said. Support for Australia's tough anti-gun policies. They banned semi-automatic assault rifles. They banned even shotguns in Australia.
Right.
You praised their policies over and over. Back in 2008, you talked about bitter Americans clinging to their guns. Even now, these executive actions have caused a lot of concern among a lot of people. What can you say to somebody tonight to convince them that you don't want to take away everybody's guns, that you're not coming for their guns?
What I've said consistently throughout my presidency is I respect the Second Amendment. I respect the right to bear arms. Now, I want to be absolutely clear at the start. I've said this over and over again. This also becomes routine. There's a ritual about this whole thing that I have to do. I believe in the Second Amendment. It's there written on the paper. It guarantees a right to bear arms. No matter how many times people try to twist my words around, I talk constitutional law. I know a little bit about this. But I also believe that we can find ways to reduce gun violence consistent with the Second Amendment. I mean, think about it. We all believe in the First Amendment, the guarantee of free speech, but we accept that you can't yell fire in a theater. We understand there are some constraints on our freedom in order to protect innocent people. We cherish our right to privacy, but we accept that you have to go through metal detectors before being allowed to board a plane. It's not because people like doing that, but we understand that that's part of the price of living in a civilized society. Today, background checks are required at gun stores. If a father wants to teach his daughter how to hunt, he can walk into a gun store, get a background check, purchase his weapon safely and responsibly. This is not seen as an infringement on the Second Amendment. Contrary to the claims of what some gun rights proponents have suggested. This hasn't been the first step in some slippery slope to mass confiscation. Contrary to claims of some presidential candidates apparently before this meeting, this is not a plot to take away everybody's guns. You pass a background check, you purchase a firearm. The problem is some gun sellers have been operating under a different set of rules. A violent felon can buy the exact same weapon over the internet with no background check, no questions asked. A recent study found that about 1 in 30 people looking to buy guns on one website had criminal records. 1 out of 30 had criminal record. We're talking about individuals convicted of serious crimes, aggravated assault, domestic violence, robbery, illegal gun possession. People with lengthy criminal histories buying deadly weapons, all too easily. And this was just one website within the span of a few months. So we've created a system in which dangerous people are allowed to play by a different set of rules than a responsible gun owner who buys his or her gun the right way and subjects themselves to a background check. That doesn't make sense. Everybody should have to abide by the same rules. Most Americans and gun owners agree. And that's what we tried to change 3 years ago, after 26 Americans, including 20 children, were murdered at Sandy Hook Elementary. 2 United States Senators, Joe Manchin, a Democrat from West Virginia, and Pat Toomey, a Republican from Pennsylvania, both gun owners, both strong defenders of our Second Amendment rights, both with A grades from the NRA. That's hard to get. Work together in good faith, consulting with folks like our Vice President, who's been a champion on this for a long time, to write a common sense compromise bill that would have required virtually everyone who buys a gun to get a background check. That was it. Pretty common sense stuff. 90% of Americans supported that idea. 90% of Democrats in the Senate voted for that idea. But it failed because 90% of Republicans in the Senate voted against that idea. How did this become such a partisan issue? The proposals that we put forward are a version, a lawful, more narrow version of what was proposed by Joe Manchin and Senator Toomey of Pennsylvania, a Republican and a Democrat, both of whom get straight A scores from the NRA. And somehow, after Newtown, that did not pass the Senate. The majority of senators wanted it, but 90% of Republicans voted against it. And I'll be honest with you, 90% of those senators didn't disagree with the proposal, but they were fearful that it was going to affect them during the election. So all I'm saying is that this debate will not change and get balanced out so that lawful gun owners and their Second Amendment rights are protected, but we're also creating a pathway towards a safer set of communities. It's not going to change until those who are concerned about violence are not as focused and disciplined during election time as those who are. And I'm going to throw my shoulders behind folks who want to actually solve problems instead of just getting a high score from an interest group. How did we get to the place where people think requiring a comprehensive background check means taking away people's guns? Each time this comes up, we are fed the excuse that common sense reforms like background checks might not have stopped the last massacre, or the one before that, or the one before that, so why bother trying? I reject that thinking. We know we can't stop every act of violence, every act of evil in the world. But maybe we could try to stop one act of evil, one act of violence. The majority of people in this country are a lot more sensible than what you see in Washington. And the reason that Washington doesn't work well, in part, is because the loudest, shrillest voices, the least compromising, the most powerful, or those with the most money, have the most influence. And the way Washington changes is when people vote. And the way we break the deadlock on this issue is when Congress does not have just a stranglehold on this debate, or excuse me, the NRA does not have a stranglehold on Congress in this debate, but it is balanced by a whole bunch of folks, gun owners, law enforcement, the majority of the American people. When their voices are heard, then things get done. Gun lobby may be holding Congress hostage right now, but they cannot hold America hostage. We do not have to accept this carnage as the price of freedom. Now, I want to be clear, Congress still needs to act. The folks in this room will not rest until Congress does. Because once Congress gets on board with common sense gun safety measures, we can reduce gun violence a whole lot more. But we also can't wait. Until we have a Congress that's in line with the majority of Americans, there are actions within my legal authority that we can take to help reduce gun violence and save more lives. Actions that protect our rights and our kids. After Sandy Hook, Joe and I worked together with our teams, and we put forward a whole series of executive actions to try to tighten up the existing rules and systems that we had in place. But today we want to take it a step further. So let me outline what we're going to be doing.
An executive order is the president signing a piece of paper telling somebody that works for him in the executive branch of the government how to do their job. So an executive order doesn't tell gun sellers how to sell guns. It tells the Bureau of Tobacco and Firearms how to enforce the laws. So can the president tighten the laws and enforce them a little bit more aggressively if he wants? Yes, but not if the effect of that is to prevent law-abiding people from owning guns. Now, here's what I think he's going to do. If I go to a gun dealer to buy a gun, they have to run a background check of me through the I live in New Jersey, through the New Jersey State Police, which in turn accesses information from the FBI. That information that they find out about me is only as good as the database, as what's in there.
Correct.
So if I'm secretly a madman, if I have all kinds of delusional mental issues and it's never been reported anywhere, it's not going to show up in the background check, no matter how aggressive the background check is. Basic mathematics. If it's not in there in the database, it's not going to come out of the database. So the president is frustrated by that, and understandably so, because occasionally madmen do get guns and get them legally. So he wants to change the rules so that if this gun that I lawfully bought, I want to sell to my neighbor and friend right here, I would have to do a background check on him. Now, that has been rejected by the Congress. So it's one thing for the president to tell the Bureau of Tobacco and Firearms how to do their job. It's another thing for him to create a law that Congress has expressly rejected. That is unconstitutional and would be stopped by the courts.
The definition of doing business, which means you have to register, and it means you have to run a background check, is if you are making a profit and repeatedly selling guns, then you should have to follow the same rules as every other gun dealer. And what
there's
that
a lot
means,
of people who believe that's not specific enough, because there's a lot of, fathers and sons who sell guns every now and then, and at gun shows, are they going to have to now start doing background checks? Are they going to start to have to register?
Look, what the Justice Department has done is provided a whole range of very specific examples. And what we ultimately need, I believe, is for Congress to set up a system that is efficient, that doesn't inconvenience the lawful gun seller or purchaser, but that makes sure that we're doing the best background check possible. And the fact, Anderson, that the system may not catch every single person, or there may be a circumstance where somebody doesn't think that they have to register and do, and that may cause some red tape and bureaucracy for them, or inconvenience, has to be weighed against the fact that we may be able to save a whole bunch of families from the grief that some of the people in this audience have had to go through. And what's changed is not that my proposals are particularly
Radical.
What's changed is we've suddenly created an atmosphere in which I put out a proposal like background checks, or after Sandy Hook, we're calling on Congress, along with people like Gabby Gifford, who herself was a victim of gun violence. We put out a proposal that is common sense, modest, does not claim to solve every problem, is respectful of the Second Amendment, and the way it is described is that we're trying to take away everybody's guns. Anybody in the business of selling firearms must get a license and conduct background checks or be subject to criminal prosecutions. It doesn't matter whether you're doing it over the internet or at a gun show. It's not where you do it, but what you do. We're also expanding background checks to cover violent criminals who try to buy some of the most dangerous firearms by hiding behind trusts and corporations and various cutouts. We're also taking steps to make the background check system more efficient. Under the guidance of Jim Comey and the FBI, and our Deputy Director, Tom Brandon at ATF, we're going to hire more folks to process applications faster, and we're going to bring an outdated background check system into the 21st century. And these steps will actually lead to a smoother process for law-abiding gun owners, a smoother process for responsible gun dealers, a stronger process for protecting the people from the public from dangerous people. So that's number one. Number two, we're going to do everything we can to ensure the smart and effective enforcement of gun safety laws that are already on the books, which means we're going to add 200 more ATF agents and investigators. We're going to require firearms dealers to report more lost or stolen guns on a timely basis. We're working with advocates to protect victims of domestic abuse from gun violence, where too often people are not getting the protection that they need.
My question is around the executive order related to the investigators, the inspectors, the adding of 200 inspectors who are more on the auditing and record-keeping side. Mm-hmm. Why not add 200 ATF agents on the law enforcement side to keep the criminals and the bad guys out of the stores in the first place? I mean, the problem seems to me to be, you mentioned dealers who are less responsible than others, and certainly it's possible that those folks are out there. But if we can enforce the laws that already exist, the tens of thousands of gun laws that are on the books right now, it might create a very significant deterrent
and Chris,
getting those people in the
Let
stores.
me also point out the number of ATF agents during your administration has actually declined. So even if you hired 200,
not
200
not
more,
because of my budget.
But even if you hired 200 more, it'll get it to what it was right before you took office.
Well, look, first of all, there are a whole bunch of responsible gun dealers out there. And my hope would be that those gun dealers would support making sure that everybody's following the same rules that they are. That's number one. Number two is we're not writing a new law. Only Congress can do that. This is about enforcing existing laws and closing what has grown into a massive loophole where a huge percentage of guns, many of whom end up being traced to crime, are not going through the responsible gun dealers, but are going through irresponsible folks who are not registered as doing business. And the whole goal here is to clarify and to put on notice that if you're a business, even if you don't have bricks and mortar, then you're supposed to register and you're supposed to conduct background checks. So the issue is not where you do it, it's what you're doing. And that should not be something that threatens responsible gun dealers across the country. In terms of the ATF, it is absolutely true that the ATF budget has been shrunk. It's a little late, but you knew what I meant. And part of it is because the politicizing of this issue. So many in the Republican Congress feel as if the ATF is not their friend, but their enemy. They have been portrayed as trying to take people's guns away, as opposed to trying to make sure that the laws are enforced. And one of the most frustrating things that I hear is when people say, who are opposed to any further laws, why don't you just enforce the laws that are on the books? And those very same members of Congress then cut ATF budgets to make it impossible to enforce the law. And so it is, and by the way, the ATF is a law enforcement agency working under the FBI that is doing enormous work in going after criminals and drug cartels and have a pretty dangerous job. So it's not as if doing background checks or auditing gun sales is all that they're doing. Part of my proposal is also developing better technologies so that we can do tracing of shells when a crime is committed in order to figure out who exactly are the perpetrators of the crime and where did they obtain the weapon. So there's a whole bunch of other elements to this that are going to be important. But my hope is that responsible gun dealers like yourself and your organization are going to be supportive of this proposal, because it should actually help push away unscrupulous dealers, and that means more customers for you guys. Number 3, we're going to do more to help those suffering from mental illness get the help that they need. High-profile mass shootings tend to shine a light on those few mentally unstable people who inflict harm on others, but the truth is that nearly 2 in 3 gun deaths are from suicides. So a lot of our work is to prevent people from hurting themselves. That's why we made sure that the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, that law made sure that treatment for mental health was covered the same as treatment for any other illness. And that's why we're going to invest $500 million to expand access to treatment across the country. It's also why we're going to ensure that federal mental health records are submitted to the background check system and remove barriers that prevent states from reporting relevant information. If we can continue to destigmatize mental health issues, get folks proper care, and fill gaps in the background check system, then we can spare more families the pain of losing a loved one to suicide. And for those in Congress who so often rush to blame mental illness for mass shootings as a way of avoiding action on guns, here's your chance to support these efforts. Put your money where your mouth is. Back in 1997, the CEO of Colt said, we can design or are starting to develop guns where you can only use it if you've got a chip. So you wear a band or a bracelet, and that then protects your 2-year-old or 3-year-old from picking up the gun and using it. And a boycott was called against them, and they had to back off of developing that technology. The same with Smith & Wesson. They were in the process of developing similar technology, and they were attacked by the NRA as surrendering. Now, to me, this does not make sense. If you are a gun owner, I would think that you would at least want a choice so that if you wanted to purchase a firearm that could only be used by you, in part to avoid accidents in your home, in part to make sure that if it's stolen, it's not used by a criminal, in part if there's an intruder, you pull the gun, but somehow it gets wrested away from you, that gun can't be turned on you and used on you. I would think there might be a market for that. You could sell that gun. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily would be the only gun that's available, but it seems to me that that would be something that in any other area, in any other product, any other commercial venture, there'd be some research and development on that because that's a promising technology. It has not been developed primarily because it's been blocked by either the NRA, which are funded by gun manufacturers, or other reasons. And what we proposed was, you know what, we're going to do some of the research. We'll work with the private sector. We'll figure out whether or not this technology can be developed, and then give everybody a choice in terms of the kind of firearm that they want to purchase, because I think that there will in fact be a market for that, and over time, that's an example of how we could reduce some of the preventable gun deaths that are out there. Number 4, we're going to boost gun safety technology. Now, today, many gun injuries and deaths are the result of legal guns that were stolen or misused or discharged accidentally. In 2013 alone, more than 500 people lost their lives to gun accidents, and that includes 30 children younger than 5 years old. Now, in the greatest, most technologically advanced nation on earth, there is no reason for this. We need to develop new technologies that make guns safer. If we can set it up so you can't unlock your phone unless you got the right fingerprint, why can't we do the same thing for our guns? If there's an app that can help us find a missing tablet, which happens to me often, the older I get. If we can do it for your iPad, there's no reason we can't do it with a stolen gun. If a child can't open a bottle of aspirin, we should make sure that they can't pull a trigger on a gun. All right? So we're going to advance research. We're going to work with the private sector to update firearms technology. And some gun retailers are already stepping up by refusing to finalize a purchase without a complete background check, or by refraining from selling semi-automatic weapons or high-capacity magazines. And I hope that more retailers and more manufacturers join them, because they should care as much as anybody about a product that now kills almost as many Americans as car accidents. I make this point because none of us can do this alone. I think Mark made that point earlier. All of us should be able to work together to find a balance that declares the rest of our rights are also important. Second Amendment rights are important, but there are other rights that we care about as well, and we have to be able to balance them. Because our right to worship freely and safely, that right was denied to Christians in Charleston, South Carolina, and that was denied Jews in Kansas City, and that was denied Muslims in Chapel Hill and Sikhs in Oak Creek. They had rights too. Our right to peaceful assembly, that right was robbed from moviegoers in Aurora and Lafayette. Our unalienable right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, those rights were stripped from college kids in Blacksburg and Santa Barbara, and from high schoolers at Columbine, and from first graders in Newtown. First graders. And from every family who never imagined that their loved one would be taken from our lives by a bullet from a gun. And from first graders in Newtown. First graders. And from every family who never imagined that their loved one would be taken from our lives by a bullet from a gun. Every time I think about those kids, it gets me mad.
Every time I think about those kids, it gets me mad. And by the way, it happens on the streets of Chicago every day.
All of us need to demand a Congress brave enough to stand up to the gun lobby's lies. All of us need to stand up and protect its citizens. All of us need to demand governors and legislators and businesses do their part to make our communities safer. We need the wide majority of responsible gun owners who grieve with us every time this happens and feel like your views are not being properly represented to join with us to demand something better. And we need voters who want safer gun laws and who are disappointed in leaders who stand in their way to remember come election time. I mean, some of this is just simple math. Yes, the gun lobby is loud and it is organized in defense of making it effortless for guns to be available for anybody, anytime. Well, you know what? The rest of us, we all have to be just as passionate. We have to be just as organized in defense of our kids. This is not that complicated. The reason Congress blocks laws is because they want to win elections. And if you make it hard for them to win an election, if they block those laws, they'll change course, I promise you.
Clearly the president getting very emotional there, but let's take the emotion out of this and let's talk about some numbers. Because here's the real question. If the president wants so badly to do something about gun violence, why is his administration and his Justice Department not enforcing existing gun laws? In 2013, President Obama outlined 23 executive actions aimed at amping up prosecutions of federal gun laws. Maybe even more surprising, you heard President Obama talk about Chicago and Newtown when he became emotional. Well, get this. In 2014, in Chicago, over 2,500 people were shot, nearly 400 of them fatally. Police seized more than 6,252 guns. Yet out of those 6,252 guns seized, federal prosecutors saw fit to pursue just 62 weapons prosecutions. In other words, for every 100 guns police seized, federal prosecutors made just one prosecution. And yet, that same year, in 2013, President Obama's Justice Department actually began slowing down on prosecutions for federal gun violations. That according to a study by Syracuse University. In fact, according to the university's track reports, prosecutions in 2013 were lower than they were in 2012. Get this, crime prosecutions dropped even lower in 2014. And actually, believe it or not, they hit an all-time low for the Obama administration in 2015. So how much of a drop are we talking here? It is a 15.5% drop in federal gun prosecutions between 2010 and 2015. What's more, it is significantly lower, 34.8% drop between President Obama and the Justice Department under President Bush in 2004. So what you need to know is that while the president seems to be creating new laws with executive orders, which is completely unconstitutional, he has a lot of ability to enforce existing laws through the Justice Department. The fact that every year for the past 3 years that has happened less frequently, well, that should be alarming to anyone who believes that we need more gun control.
And part of the reason I welcomed this opportunity by CNN to have a good discussion, debate about it, is because our position is consistently mischaracterized. And by the way, there's a reason why the NRA is not here. They're just down the street.
The NRA's Chris Cox with his organization's first response to President Obama. Chris, thank you so much for being here. So let's start with the notion that he wants to meet with you. He went on to say, if only you'll put aside your rhetoric and what he seemed to be describing as straw men when it comes to gun issues. Are you prepared to meet with him?
Well, Megan, let's be clear what this is really about. This president's trying to create an illusion that he's doing something to keep people safe. He needs to do that because the truth is his policies have failed miserably. We saw that materialize itself in San Bernardino when we had a terrorist attack. This president didn't use it as an opportunity to unite this country. He didn't use it as an opportunity to lay out a plan to defeat terrorism. He used it as an opportunity to impose more gun control on law-abiding Americans.
He's
so let's
treating
be clear.
that as a case of gun violence as well.
Exactly. This is an attempt to distract the American people away from his failed policies. So did we participate in CNN's event tonight? No, we didn't. We were offered one pre-screened question. Megan, I know that you don't send your questions over to the White House, so I'd rather have a conversation with you that's intellectually honest than sit through a lecture and get one opportunity to ask a pre-screened question.
Does it make sense to meet with him?
Well, and talk about what, Megan? This president can talk about background checks all day long, but that's nothing more than a distraction away from the fact that he can't keep us safe, and he's supported every gun control proposal that's ever been made. He doesn't support the individual right to own a firearm. That's been the position of his Supreme Court nominees. That's been the position of his administration. So what are we going to talk about? Basketball? I'm not really interested in going over and talking to the president who doesn't have a basic level of respect or understanding of the Second Amendment and law-abiding gun owners in this country.
Here's what he said. Tonight he tried to say this, that there's not an area of our lives that we don't make a little safer. He talked about little toys for children that they could choke on. He talked about cars and seatbelt laws. And he said to not apply that same principle to guns would be inconsistent.
Megan, this president would have the American people believe that in order to love your children, you have to hate your firearms. That's not only offensive, it's disgusting. This president would have you believe that somehow we don't care about keeping our kids safe. Gun owners in this country do more, and the National Rifle Association does more to teach safe and responsible gun ownership than this president ever has or ever will.
When he talks about the gun show loophole, which is what his executive action is trying to get at, among other things, and he went on to say that that's a massive loophole and that people have exploited it to avoid background checks, and sometimes those guns have wound up being used in murders.
Megan, the San Bernardino murderer had something in common with the Santa Barbara murder and the Tucson murder and the Aurora murder and the Chattanooga, the Charleston, the Southern Virginia. All of them went through President Obama's background check, and every one of them passed. Every one of those murderers passed this background check.
It's a huge
so we
problem.
can talk about it's 0.7%, according to Barack Obama's Justice Department. 0.7% of criminals obtain their firearms through gun shows. 0.7%.
That's an unbelievable stat, the way you listed it there, that all those murderers went through and passed the background check. He was sort of asked about that, and you saw Paul Babot, the sheriff out in Arizona, get up there and say, none of your measures would have prevented any of these mass shootings, right? None of them. And President Obama said, look, mental health problems are real. Violent crime is real. We're not going to stop at either of those entirely in this country, which is that's not realistic. He said the question is, can we make it less lethal when it happens? And he cited an example that he cited the other day out of China. Right around the time Newtown happened, it was 2010, a guy took a knife, guns are banned over there, it stabbed 23 children, not one died, because he didn't have a semi-automatic rifle, is what the president said.
Megan, this president in his 8th year has decided he wants to talk about doing something about prosecutions in this country. He has overseen a 40% decrease in the prosecution of criminal misuse of firearms. At the same time, as if that's not bad enough, he's going back and releasing armed criminals who have been successfully prosecuted and sent to jail. This president's lost all credibility because he's no longer credible to speak to the issues of law-abiding gun owners.
All right, last question, Chris. He brought up Newtown, which is moving to every American with a heart. And he cried the other day at the White House and talking about Newtown, and it's not tough to figure out why. You know, when you think back to the children, the 6-year-olds who were murdered by some lunatic that day, the face of evil. And he said it was the only time in his presidency he's ever seen the Secret Service cry when they went to Newtown days after. One of the worst days of my presidency. What is your solution? How do you say we prevent another Newtown?
Well, Megan, the president doesn't have a monopoly on compassion in this country. The president doesn't have a monopoly on loving and caring about kids. The president doesn't get to lecture us on loving our kids and caring about our kids. This president has done nothing to keep us safe. His policies have been a failure from start to finish. The National Rifle Association believes that we should protect our kids in our schools the same way we protect our president, our politicians, our athletes, and our money at our banks. And that's with armed security officers. Armed security officers protecting our kids at school. At the same time, we can do something about mental health. Megan, you and I have been on this show talking about the need for mental health reform. This president in year 8 has decided he wants to have a conversation. Welcome to the party. The National Rifle Association has been trying to have this conversation for years. So have Republicans in Congress who tried to do something meaningful, but this president was more interested in defeating the NRA than defeating crime, defeating a mental health problem, and ultimately defeating terrorism. It's a shame, but it's what we've come to expect out of this president.
Up until just now, where the president's pushing for more money on mental health, the vice president was quoted by lawmakers saying that they're not interested in that. They're tabling that for now. Chris, I got to run. I thank you
Thanks,
for being
Megan.
here tonight.
Thank you.
Joining me now with more, Judge Andrew Napolitano. When you listen to the president through the tears and raising Newtown talk about it, it sounds simple, right? Like, of course, we need to do more to protect children. When you hear the other side, you're reminded of how complicated this issue really is when you actually look at the cold, hard facts.
The president was not being intellectually honest tonight, Megan, because the president kept referring to my proposal, my proposal, my proposal. Every one of those proposals was rejected by the Congress. The Congress writes the laws, not the president. Yet the president has offered in his speech on Tuesday of this week to enact these into law via executive order and executive authority. Basically,
it's the same thing that happened with immigration.
Correct. And the courts stopped him with respect to immigration and basically said you can't change the immigration laws, and they will stop him with respect to this. The issue is not the wisdom of what he wants to do. The issue is the authority. He does not have the authority to change the law, no matter how noble his goals may be. And he understands that.
Not even around the edges. I mean, this is like tighten the loophole that allows the gun sales in certain cases.
If Congress had remained silent on it, and the president wanted to try to regulate an area of congressional silence, there's some authority in constitutional jurisprudence that would let him wade in there. But Congress has not been silent. What he failed to say at that town hall meeting tonight is that Congress rejected his proposals 3 times during his presidency, including when Congress was controlled by the Democrats in the first 2 years.
Right.
He cannot overcome the will of Congress by rewriting the law. Then he's a prince rather than a president.
Thank you for being here, Mr. President. As you know, Gabby and I are both gun owners. We take gun ownership very seriously and, really think about the voices of responsible gun owners in this debate. But I want to follow up to something Father Pfleger said and your answer to his question, and it's about expanded background checks. Often what you hear in the debate of expanding background checks to more gun sales, and as you know, Gabby and I are 100% behind the concept of somebody getting a background check before buying a gun.
But when we testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, we heard not only from the gun lobby, but from United States senators that expanding background checks will, not may, will lead to a registry, which will lead to confiscation, which will lead to a tyrannical government. So I would like you to explain, with 350 million guns in 65 million places, households, from Key West to Alaska. 350 million objects in 65 million places. If the federal government wanted to confiscate those objects, how would they do that?
Well, look. So yes, it is a false notion that I believe is circulated for either political reasons or commercial reasons in order to prevent a coming together among people of goodwill to develop common sense rules that will make us safer while preserving the Second Amendment. And the notion that we can't agree on some things while not agreeing on others. And the reason for that is because, well, the president secretly wants to do X. It would mean that we'd be paralyzed about doing everything. I mean, maybe when I propose to make sure that, unsafe drugs are taken off the market, that secretly I'm trying to control the entire drug industry or take people's drugs away, but probably not. What's more likely is I just want to make sure that people are not dying by taking bad drugs.
You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.